I'd like to get back a little bit to what you said about Medicaid, which is just so incredibly outrageous that the money that they're getting from the railroad company is now going to be counted as part of their income, because we could do an entire show on Medicaid, and we know that it's a second tier system of healthcare for the poor, and it's a means tested program, meaning that you have to prove your poverty month after month after month, or depending on which state you live in, whether it's month to month or every 6 months or annually. And if you make $2 above that cutoff, then for that next month, you're not going to be getting your Medicaid. You're not going to qualify for Medicaid. And then the next month, your boss takes hours away, and then yes, you can qualify for Medicaid, and then your boss gives you more. And so it's this churning of people on Medicaid, which is it's just so demeaning to have to keep proving your poverty over and over again. And we know that as a result of the fact that we are now have ended the pandemic, Congress passed the Reconciliation Act in December of 2022, with a specific date that the pandemic was going to end March 31st. How they came up with that date, I have no idea. But as a result of that, some of what they were calling the Medicaid continuous enrollment provision that was part of the initial Families First COVID Response Act that gave states more matching funds in order to keep their enrollees or their beneficiaries on Medicaid for continuously, meaning they didn't have to re-enroll month after month after month. And so they were on so people on Medicaid have been on Medicaid for 3 years, which has been great. And as a result, amazingly, during the pandemic, the uninsurance rate, the number of uninsured went down in 28 states as opposed to going up because of the fact that people just weren't losing their Medicaid. They just stayed on their Medicaid, and 20 million more people were eligible for Medicaid. But now we're learning that because the public health emergency is ending or has ended, that states are now going to start to disenroll and beneficiaries, and up to about 15 million people are going to be losing their Medicaid benefits, as well as many other benefits as well.
15 million people are going to be potentially losing let's say 15 million people could lose their coverage as a result of this, because the requirement that states keep people on Medicaid during the pandemic, that's come to an end. And, it reminds me a bit, like you said, where did this date come from? Everyone laughed at Trump when he said it was going to be done by Easter. But what's the data that Biden is basing this on? I mean, they don't even report a bunch of the numbers.
Well, it's very close to Easter, actually.
Yeah.
He just had the year off.
He was just wrong about the year. Yeah, right.
Yeah, off by a year, but
although I think that they set a definite date by which they were going to start kicking people off of Medicaid, regardless of whether the end of the public health emergency was declared or not. So, and it really is going to be tragic. It's 250,000 people just in little Kentucky who are going to lose their.
Even looking at it specific to East Palestine too, I mean, I don't have the specific number of folks, but when you look at what the median income is in East Palestine, it's roughly, as of 2020, roughly $28,000. The amount of single parents that I've talked to in East Palestine who are living on something like that with kids, a lot of folks that I talk to are using SNAP benefits, are on Medicaid, and one woman that I spoke with this morning who lives in East Palestine told me, she's like, at the time when I was getting this money from Norfolk Southern, I'd seen that I had a W-9 form that I needed to fill out, and I was weary about it then. I was weary about it, and they, I was assured that it was going to be no problem, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, but I didn't have a choice. Like, I needed to leave. This woman, her home is 20 feet away from Sulphur Run, which is the small creek that basically goes right from ground zero of the derailment site and runs towards the Ohio River through a series of tributaries. and she lives right on it, like right next to it. There were these aeration devices right next to her home, basically, you know, a couple less than 100 feet away, spraying this contaminated water into the air, trying to separate the chemicals out of it. You may have seen some of these photos or clips of this on Twitter, and like her home was 100% contaminated. I don't need an air detector in my hand to tell you that. I can tell you by just smelling what it was outside and inside. There was something not right with her home and many of these other folks. So, you know, these folks are, unfortunately, many of them living right at this income threshold where you may or may not qualify. They were already dealing with what you were talking about, Anna, of being qualified and then being not qualified and making, you know, $200 more one month or something because they had a good month, and then the next month they lose it again. And then in between that, you're dealing with like trying to go through the healthcare marketplace and all of this sort of stuff. It was been a couple of years, but I was on Medicaid for a little bit, and it was so stressful. It was so stressful. And I'm fortunate that I'm pretty healthy and I have some family that would help me if anything were to have happened. But a lot of these other folks do not have that. And they are living through this situation right now that is by no fault of their own at all, exclusively the fault of Norfolk Southern, this railroad. And they are now having to deal with the consequences of this with, like I said, essentially zero help from the federal government so far. It drives me crazy every single day. And when I started digging into some of this today, I start to feel like a madman a little bit more every day, unfortunately.